This lesson's on Southern Writers Part 2, O'Connor and Walker. We're going to kind of continue on with Southern humor in some ways. And in the spirit of that, the gentlemen down below in the right-hand corner there have made themselves what is affectionately called a redneck swimming pool. So I just thought I would kick off there with a little bit of redneck humor too, for the fun of it, because we're going to be talking about humor with both these stories. We already have dealt with some humor, certainly. The the previous lesson had a very humorous short story in it. By the way, I've actually been in a redneck swimming pool like that. They work pretty well. You would be surprised. I was much younger and more foolish, but they actually do work. So go give it a try. It's rather harmless, I suppose, if you can find a friend with a pickup truck and a water hose and a tarp. Going to talk a little bit about the Southern grotesque because with Flannery O'Connor's Good Country People, you certainly see this. It's not something we've talked about before. We talked about the Southern Gothic tradition, but not necessarily the Southern grotesque. And you'll be seeing that here, and you'll see it in James Dickey's Deliverance. A fascination with things that are abnormalities, anomalies, particularly when we're talking about physical characteristics or traits of certain characters. Boy, you could get, if you were a Freudian or you were a Jungian or you were any other sort of psychoanalytic sort of background, you could have a lot of fun with this. I'm sure people have. Why are Southerners in their stories, in their fiction and such, in their films, so obsessed with individuals who show strange physical traits, grotesque sort of abnormalities and such. Not always grotesque abnormalities, but the unusual. We really like or obsess almost in the South with that which is unusual. Some kid that's got a sixth toe on his foot or something. Some guy who's got like an eyeball that is kind of crazy, and so there's a lot of that. Of course, Northerners will tell you that's a sign of inbreeding or something. You know, it's kind of a snobbery thing on the part of people outside of the South. But Southerners really always have been sort of and a lot of folklore is based, and storytelling is based on the freakish, the grotesque, the abnormal, the unusual. In Dickey's novel, there's an albino boy in Flannery O'Connor. She's got a young woman who has lost her leg, and so on and so forth. There's always some strange sort of thing that's kind of out of the ordinary that you see frequently. Now the question is, of course, why is that? I can't put my finger on it. I think it's the basis of something that makes for great storytelling. It's a wonderful sort of lead off. You know, there once was a kid who had six toes, and it's a hook that gets you straight into a story once you see that. You know, the petrified man is an example of that. The fascination with that which is really strange and unusual is a great hook into a story. Maybe there's something endemic in Southern culture about that. I don't know. You could get into things about identity and insecurity and so on and so forth. One other thing I want to raise here is the importance of Southern humor and identity. Now, of course, in the South, throughout history, most of the time, people have looked at things in racial terms frequently. Black and white, African American, Caucasian, so on and so forth. Class plays an important role, of course, as we saw. But a lot of the humor is frequently about identity, about who the person is who's telling the story, or about that person's ethnic group or class or background or region. Okay? There's a lot of Texas-based humor. There's a lot of Mississippi-based humor. There's a lot of Appalachian humor. There's a lot of African-American humor. There's a lot of redneck humor. And frequently it's self-effacing. And that's an interesting quality. It's not so much about making fun of other people as it is about making fun of oneself or one's own group. At least the stuff that we find funny today. All the redneck jokes. You might be a redneck if. There's only one way that fella can get away with telling those, and that's because, well, that's his background, and it's okay to laugh at ourselves, and it's okay to laugh at these kinds. You'll see that, of course, in O'Connor. O'Connor is from that white rural Georgia background, and she is an educated woman in a family that's not so educated, and so it's not hard to see some overlap there, where she's trying to sort of make fun of herself, her own class and race and community in her story. The same thing with Alice Walker in Everyday Use. We'll see that in a little bit as well. This is about African American identity and Southern African American identity, and poking a little fun at ourselves. It doesn't do any harm. The other thing I want to raise too is, as we go through these stories and any others that you may see, hopefully you'll read more widely than just the ones that we've selected for this class. Hope it sparks some interest in you to read some more about Southern humor. Is that one trait that I've always noticed is that there's always some sort of moral underpinning to Southern humor. It's not just about laughing at something for its own sake. There seems to be some sort of moral point, even if you go back as far as Mark Twain, and you take a look at Pudd'nhead Wilson or Huckleberry Finn. The jokes in there aren't just jokes to be, I don't know, cruel, or jokes to be to tease. There's some sort of moral or ethical point underneath it. It seems almost that we can't separate our humor from our religion in the South. It's not just the Bible Belt. It's a moral belt that we have here, that our humor even needs to somehow reinforce a deep-seated sense of right and wrong. And O'Connor's humor is dark. It's a little bit cruel in some ways. We'll see that here in a minute. But it's also very funny, because what happens is tending towards enlightenment, moral enlightenment. Are we better than other people, or just because we have an education or not? Maybe not. Walker as well. Know who you are and don't be so uppity and so vain. Your origins are humble, and you should be proud of your humble origins, and so on. So there's always some sort of moral tie-in with that humor. It's not just humor for the sake of humor, or humor to denigrate someone else. So that's an interesting kind of quality. We're going to step inside here and take a look at O'Connor and also Alice Walker, and take a closer look at how their stories are put together.